Private members' business, notice number 1 for a motion in relation to the National Broadband Network.
I call the member for Gilmore.
I move the motion relating to the National Broadband Network in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper. Deputy Speaker, Gilmore is an exciting and wondrous place to live, with contrasting scenery, contrasting lifestyles and certainly contrasting technology. One part of Gilmore, the seaside village of Kiama, has been blessed, according to the previous government, regarding the rollout of the NBN, while other parts of Gilmore struggle to get an ADSL connection. During the past 3 years, the NBN was put on a technology pedestal that was not only impossible to maintain, but impossible in application. Everyone, according to the policymakers of the day, deserved to have fibre-to-the-home technology with 100 megabits per second, and people were adamant in their demands. They, of course, did not need 100 megabits per second. They were only downloading the odd movie and their favourite music. Everything else was pretty average, with emails and the occasional mini YouTube download. That need is between 8 and 12 megabits per second. In the beginning, the people of Kiama were delighted to be one of the pilot rollout areas. I cannot report that the enthusiasm continued throughout the project. Developing new names for the NBN were not blah blah necessary or the national broadband nightmare. More recently, this has improved. Originally, the cables were all supposed to be underground, but someone forgot to check the local geology. Kiama is built on basalt, so you can imagine how many engineers' drills were broken or replaced when blunt. In fact, the entire project was put under pressure by unrealistic construction times and untrained technicians. Typical, really, pushing a project for the big media grab but not making sure the best solutions were applied. The Labor government's desire to roll out the infrastructure according to their political timetable was unrealistic, badly planned, and it absolutely reflected a lack of business acumen. It's no wonder the project blew the budget bottom line and had thousands of homes not connected according to their schedule. Apart from the cabling change, some streets in Kiama were without water for 5 days, there were power losses, there were homes connected, but oops, should have been the neighbour's place. Cable was connected to the home, then the owners were told there was an additional cost to put cable throughout the house. Driveways were dug up, medical alerts were not being connected, connection appointments were not kept, triggering paperwork in some cases, 8 copies of the same material and 8 rescheduled connection times. At the same time, there were complaints from other areas in Gilmore demanding immediate connection, if only they knew. Many residents in Kiama wish they were not a guinea pig site. There are so many residents who assisted in having the medical alert facility accelerated as part of the changeover. Thank you for your passion and persistence. Thank you also to the many others who have shown great fortitude and patience in what has been to date a very frustrating experience. They include Rod Cork, who told us that businesses had been caught up in the problems, Peter Snelling, whose patience is beyond belief, John Holgate with her multiple correspondence copies, Ross and Joyce Brown, who had no water. But most of all, thank you to Robert G and Michael T, regional managers for NBN and Telstra. Some would say you're both just doing your job, but your efforts in diffusing the myriad issues have been amazing. When a government lacks business experience, there are problem consequences. Putting unrealistic expectations on provider companies without listening to their concerns and their knowledge to improve the system causes waste, inefficiency and customer frustration. The list goes on. Straight after the election, we carried out a strategic review. The startling summary of findings: if we had followed Labor's plan, the cost would end up being almost $73 billion. That's $29 billion more than the public had been told, and it would not reach the final rollout destinations until 2024. An 80% increase in the cost of broadband for the average family, and $6.5 billion had been spent with only 3% of the scheduled connections completed. The new plan is a combination of technologies. It is cost-efficient, time-efficient and technological flexible to grow with advances over time. The plan includes extending the interim satellite service. $34 million has been allocated to upgrade the services for existing users, expand the service availability and establish a subsidy scheme for the cost of on-premise equipment and installation. The fixed wireless review also showed that Labor had not fully catered for the needs of regional areas like Gilmore. In the September quarter, the summary of the reviews is due, and it will describe a mix of technologies for NBN as an updated 2014 to 2017 corporate plan, including a detailed rollout schedule. This is essential for everyone to know that their village has not fallen off the map, as some of our local media imply, or to have an NBN that is somehow inferior, or to be ignored as those on the opposite side will pretend. The government's NBN plan will be far more rational and national approach to the development of broadband infrastructure, where those areas with little or no internet at present will be seen as a priority. A faster and more cost-effective rollout is the action of an experienced and responsible government.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion? Yes. The member for Corangamite. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
Yeah, I'm happy to reserve the right.
Okay.
Yes.
I call the member for Blaxland.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I don't think this government could lie straight in bed. 2 weeks ago, the government handed down a budget which included broken promises on education, on health.
I'm sorry. Mr Speaker, can I just draw your attention to the unparliamentary language that's just been used by the member opposite and ask that he withdraw that?
Okay. Specifically?
Specifically?
In relation to, I'm accusing the government of lying.
Oh, I see.
Well, I haven't said that, but I've said this government couldn't lie straight in bed.
Well, that's
And
unparliamentary
let me make it
language.
very clear. Yeah. This is a government which has broken promises.
So, if I could just ask for your ruling on that, Mr Acting Speaker.
It was a play on words. I might let that pass.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. So they've broken promises on education, on health, on pensions, on taxes, and then they come into the parliament and move this motion where they're proselytising keeping their promises on the NBN. Well, quick news flash, they've broken promises on the NBN as well. In April last year, the Prime Minister said that if elected, everyone would have access to 25 megabits per second by the end of 2016. Well, that promise, Deputy Speaker, has been broken as well. On the last sitting day in this parliament, when everyone was distracted by the closure of Holden, Malcolm Turnbull, the Minister for Communications, came into the parliament and said that the government was breaking that promise as well. And it's not the only promise they've broken on the NBN. They promised 9 million households would get fibre to the node. Now it's only about 3 million households that will get that. And there's also this ripper. In February of last year, Tony Abbott, then opposition leader, said, if we don't go ahead with the NBN in its current form, that's about $50 billion less that the Commonwealth will have to borrow. Well, that's not true either, and the budget papers prove it. In last year's budget, our last budget, showed that we would allocate $30.4 billion in government equity to build the NBN. In this budget, the Liberal Party shows that it'll allocate $29.5 billion. It's not a $50 billion difference, it's a $1 billion difference. But the real difference is what the people of Australia will get. Under Labor, they would have got the real NBN, fibre to the premises, a game-changing project that will change the way we live, change the way we work. Under this government, only 25% of Australia will get fibre to the premises. The rest of Australia will miss out. They'll get a second-rate NBN, a second-rate NBN from a third-rate government. And I don't think, you've got to ask yourself, why is this happening? I think it's because the Liberal Party doesn't understand how important the NBN is. You've got a Prime Minister who says he's the infrastructure Prime Minister of Australia, but describes the NBN as effectively a video entertainment system. And he wants to tear this project down, but at the same time build a paid parental leave scheme to give $50,000 to rich mums who don't need it. The reason I make this point is for this reason. The cost of the paid parental leave scheme over the next decade is more than the cost of building the NBN over the next decade. And Mr Deputy Speaker, which one do you think will have a bigger impact on the Australian economy? Well, I can tell you, it's the NBN. And the member for Gilmore should know better, because in her electorate is the town of Kiama, one of the first places to get the NBN. And the people that are in Kiama who are using it love it. Well, I have, and there's a woman named Sharon Parker who lives in your electorate who said this: downloading, uploading, fast, brilliant, sending emails instant, downloading really big documents, we get it straight away, brilliant, we don't have any dramas, none whatsoever. Well, by her actions, the member for Gilmore is denying the rest of her electorate the same service that Sharon Parker is getting. Towns like Nowra, Gerringong, Jarrah will all miss out on what Kiama is getting, they'll get the second-rate NBN. And don't worry, we will tell them about it. If they don't know about it already, we'll tell them. Come the next election in 2016, we'll tell the people of Nowra and Gerringong and Geroa that they're missing out on the real NBN because of this short-sighted government. And we'll remind them of the promises that this Prime Minister has broken on education, on health, on pensions, on taxes and on the NBN. And they're missing out because they trusted this untrustworthy government.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Corangamite.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. What we've just heard from the member for Blaxland is another example of the Labor Party living in La La Land. The figures that we've just heard are absolutely rubbish.
Deputy Speaker.
And
Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't think that the term La La Land is really respectful or worthy of being used within the Parliament, and I think that the member should be asked to rephrase her language and use some more parliamentary type language that actually is in line with what one would expect from a member of Parliament.
On this occasion, I'll allow it. Please
thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. As I said, this is another example of the Labor Party living in La La Land. We have seen how the Labor Party has monumentally driven...
Mr Deputy Speaker, I have a question for the member under 666A.
Okay. Do you...
No, I don't allow the member to intervene. Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. As I say, this is another example of the Labor Party living in La La Land. We have seen, Mr Deputy Speaker, how the Labor Party, the previous federal government, has driven our country into monumental debt and deficit. It has shown that it does not know how to run the economy. And despite the member opposite's attempts to shut me down in this debate, I will proudly say loud and clear, and it's unfortunate that she's trying to do it again,
Mr Deputy Speaker.
Order.
Yes, I have another question I would like to ask the member under 66A.
You can only intervene on one occasion, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. So I return to the debate and I remind those who are watching this and seeing the display opposite of Labor's mess. And I look at page 52 of Labor's mess, which is also on my website, and there is no more monumental example of an infrastructure mess than the NBN. In 2007, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, Labor promised a national broadband network costing $4.7 billion, which would be completed by 2013. In 2009, they switched to an NBN costing 10 times as much. After 6 years of Labor government, only 3% of Australians had access to the NBN, and fewer than 100,000 were using it. Labor's NBN achieved only 16% of its original rollout target for June 2013 and only 7% of its target for paying customers. So, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, what we have seen again from Labor, from the previous federal government, is an example of incompetence. This is an infrastructure project that Labor failed to deliver, and the member for Blaxland has got his figures dramatically wrong. As we know from our strategic review, this project we have costed at $78 billion. We are proudly delivering around about 26% of fibre to the premise for homes right around the country. But let me just remind the people of my electorate in Corangamite, when Labor decided to roll out the NBN, one of the big differences, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, it did not prioritise those who needed the NBN the most, those in rural and regional areas. And frankly, it is a disgrace that in southern Geelong, in places like Highton and Belmont, Grovedale, Warn Ponds and Marshall, where people in my electorate are absolutely desperate for internet connections, that Labor completely excluded those people in my electorate from the rollout. So once again, Mr Deputy Speaker, we see an absolute failure of Labor to care for country people, of Labor to regard country people as a priority. And what we have seen with the rollout in southern Geelong is a very good example of that, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also remind the House, apart from the massive cost blowout, and as we will see in this Labor's mess booklet, that the targets were not only appalling, but the independent review has revealed that Labor's NBN, up to 200,000 households and businesses in regional, rural and remote areas were going to miss out on a connection entirely without policy changes. So this has been a monumental infrastructure disaster. We are proudly fixing Labor's mess. We are proudly rolling out the NBN quickly, efficiently and delivering fast broadband right across Australia, which is what the Labor Party unfortunately failed to do, like so much of many of the other failures that Labor has failed to do. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Now, this motion unwittingly reveals one of the few qualities of the Abbott government. Because I know after their first chaotic budget, not too many people are talking up the qualities of the government and watching them sell what has been described as a stinking carcass of a budget, high praise from their side. It's painfully obvious that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are struggling in talking up themselves and their own qualities. Now, considering this, I thought I'd lend them a hand and I'd use the member for Gilmore's resolution as well, because you see, the member for Gilmore's resolution champions one of the greatest hidden attributes of the government, which is its sense of irony. Look hard and you'll find that that quality is on display with everything that the government does. The quality's been on show from their first swearing in right through to their first budget. And if you're having trouble identifying this, just check out the responsibilities they've set up for their ministers. A Prime Minister who shaped a ministry with the lowest level of female representation in living memory, he's the Minister for Women. An industry minister that oversees the closure of industries. A health minister whose biggest job right now is discouraging the sick from seeing a doctor. A social services minister that is cutting the incomes of young and employed, making sure they have less money for things such as, I don't know, food and rent, but making sure they got a couple of $100 for marriage counselling. An infrastructure minister that's distanced himself from any infrastructure project that doesn't involve building a road. He should just rebadge himself the Minister for Tar, and he's helped by the member for Mayo, the Assistant Minister for Tar. But the greatest, the finest, blaring example of irony, a Minister for Communications tasked with the slow death of one of the biggest communications projects in the country, the NBN. And he's ably supported by backbenchers who run interference, creating confusion and dismay about a project that will actually benefit their own electorates. Here is a regional member of parliament backed up by 3 regional members of parliament today, arguing against improving the quality of infrastructure in their own patch. What are we going to see next? A Conservative government argue for lifting the taxes on the well-off? No, they've done that one too. So we've got here the government turning NBN into what's been described as a CBN, a copper broadband network, and they're not doing anything inventive. All they're doing is reverting to type, the type that's dogged them from the last time they were in government, where they had 20 failed broadband plans, tinkering with copper when fibre is what will be required to get the job done and done right. Instead of 93% of homes being connected with fibre, the coalition will only connect 26% this way. That's what these regional members are applauding here today. Instead of ensuring complete coverage by satellite and wireless in those hard-to-reach areas, these members are chanting for a $80 million mobile phone tower program where data costs will be higher and speeds will be slower. They're presiding over a plan described by veteran analysts as a dog's breakfast. Paul Budd described as a dog's breakfast. It's so bad the promises they've made at the election have already been dropped, for example 25 megabits per second by 2016. So what's the member for Gilmore talking about when she talks about the NBN? In this resolution, it's not about the network itself, she's focused on reviews. Reviews. Since government's come to office, they haven't been rolling out fibre, they've been rolling out red carpet to consultants. You can't see, when I see the minister out and about wearing a fluoro vest, I don't know why. He's not building a network, he's building a Brandis-esque library of consultant reviews and reports. And if they're not, well, and if they're not rolling around in glee making snow angels out of the invoices that the consultants have sent them, they're working hard to suppress different views on the NBN. You only have to look. I've been surprised to see, for instance, reports that the ABC is withholding reports about the NBN because they don't want to upset their new masters, and they're failing to report on the national broadband network. Now, make no doubt about it, people want fibre to the premises. They don't want the coalition CBN, they want the NBN. I know this from my own area, where I've often raised the concerns of local residents in Woodcroft and Doonside. Now, fortunately, and to their credit, in April the government reversed a terrible decision they made in December where they dropped these suburbs from the rollout. But while one half will get the NBN, the other half won't. And there are patches of these suburbs that are bizarrely omitted. Now, the Shadow Minister for Communications attended a forum I held earlier this month where residents expressed a clear view they wanted the job done properly. And in the words I think signal a firm view across modern Australia, it was told, "This is Australia, not a third world country. There are other countries worse than us that have better broadband service. If I have a right to vote, I should have a right to better broadband." That's the expectation of modern Australia, not what these people are delivering.
The member's time has expired. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I commend the member for Gilmore for this motion. And she knows, as I do, that regional Australia needs better broadband sooner. And regional Australia needs to catch up to the major metropolitan centres and have access to the type of broadband service that allows business to grow and compete and individuals to enjoy an equivalent level of support. Well, Labor and government failed to prioritise regional communities in the original NBN plan, and many regional areas with no broadband service were left behind and had to watch as a metropolitan area were upgraded. Labor underestimated the number of Australians in regional and remote areas who want the NBN by a factor of 2 to 3. It's easily demonstrated by their bungling of the NBN interim satellite service, which provides temporary internet access for premises in metropolitan fringe, regional and remote areas with no other way of getting broadband. In December 2013, the ISS reached its capacity of 48,000 customers and registrations were closed. Well, in July 2013, Labor told 250,000 households and businesses, many with other broadband options, that they were eligible for the ISS. Well, tens of thousands were left demanding service but unable to obtain it. Labor spent $351 million to the ISS, $7,300 per user, yet it delivers dial-up service to many users. By comparison, the Coalition has made unserviced and underserviced regions a priority.
Absolutely.
The government moved in April 2014 to fix Labor's mistakes. $34 million was committed to improving the ISS to improve service quality for existing users, allow new connections and establish a subsidy scheme for the cost of on-premises equipment and installation. And the government is committed to rolling out the national broadband network as quickly as possible, at less cost to taxpayers and more affordably for consumers. In 9 months, the number of premises covered has increased 65%, from 348,000 to 573,000. The rollout is proceeding using a multi-technology mix that matches the right technology to the right location and leverages existing infrastructure. The NBN Co strategic review found that if Labor's NBN proceeded, it would cost $72.6 billion. $29 billion, just a mere $29 billion more than the public were told, and lift broadband costs by up to 80% and take till 2024. The government's approach will save taxpayers $32 billion, get the NBN finished 4 years sooner, and to enable 9 out of 10 Australians in the fixed line footprint to have access to download speeds of 50 megabits per second or more by 2019. In my own electorate of Forrest, NBN has recently announced new services to be provided by fibre and fixed wireless technologies in Brunswick, Stratham and Buena. This will add to the 44,000 homes and businesses in Western Australia with access to the NBN. And I was especially glad to see the media release from NBN Co announcing the additional services in the electorate. And I would like to quote from that release. For many homes, farms and businesses in regional and rural Western Australia, the rollout of the NBN will provide access to the internet speeds and bandwidth that many in big cities take for granted. That's how it is in rural and in regional Australia. And we saw the overbuild, and we've heard that repeatedly about the overbuild that Labor's NBN, instead of prioritising rural and regional, they overbuilt in areas where there were sometimes two services already available. It's taken the installation of a coalition government to get that recognition, and I am very glad that we have it. NBN Co will release an updated 2014-17 corporate plan in the September quarter of 2014. This will include detailed information about the rollout schedule, and I look forward to seeing it spell out how to deliver better broadband in Forest.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Greenway.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, looking at the motion that's before us, on every single point, the mover has stumbled, perhaps unwittingly, into the realms of what I call Turnbullistan. It's almost as if this motion was drafted in the Minister's office. And it talks about the strategic review of the NBN. And the Minister, because this really does look like it was drafted in the Minister's office, likes to claim that the strategic review tells him that Labor's plan for its NBN would cost $72.6 billion, increase prices for consumers and not be complete until 2024. On every single one of these claims made by the Minister, he is wrong. He is deliberately misleading the community. I'm very concerned also that he is unwittingly misleading the member for Gilmore. And on the issue of cost, it is false, absolutely false, to claim that the strategic review identified that completing the NBN under Labor's plan would cost $72.6 billion, because the revised outlook in the strategic review did not represent the cost of building a fibre-to-the-premises network, which was Labor's NBN. It was a hypothetical exercise based on a series of forward projections and assumed that management of the project would not achieve any efficiencies. And furthermore, the Minister continually and incorrectly refers to the three different concepts of cost used in describing the NBN, these being the sum total of all capital expenditure, the peak funding requirement, which is the sum of capital expenditure plus operating losses until the project becomes cash flow positive, and levered peak funding requirement, which assumes that only a portion of the peak funding is provided by government equity contributions and that the portion raised by private debt funding includes costs incurred in raising the debt. The Minister's own strategic review reveals two things about the cost. Firstly, that the only real difference in the cost to the Commonwealth between Labor's plan and the government's plan is less than $1 billion in equity financing. Secondly, that choosing levered peak funding inflates the result by including costs of debt. Therefore, it could be just as reasonably claimed that the strategic review showed that the fibre-to-the-premises NBN could be built for the capital expenditure included in the corporate plan. I would also note that this was the mob running around prior to the election saying the cost of the NBN was $90 billion. And even the hapless member for Moncrief used that figure in the House a few weeks ago. And I point out, just to make it clear how out of date he is, here I am in the Joint Committee on the National Broadband Network, 19th of April last year, where I asked, so this is a hearing of the Parliament, where I asked then, I want to go back to your briefing at the start, just to be crystal clear. The NBN cost $37.4 billion. What veracity should then be given to assertions that the NBN cost could in fact be around $90 billion? And he says, I can only repeat we're confident of our figure. So I asked him, do you know how the $90 billion figure was derived that those opposite were running around talking about? And the answer was no. But perhaps the most galling point in this motion is in regards to election commitments, because before this government became experts on breaking election commitments, they were breaking promises on the NBN. And we all remember the laughable press conference with the then opposition leader and the member for Wentworth and Sonny Bill Williams. And during that press conference, the now Prime Minister said, under the coalition, by 2016, there will be minimum download speeds of 25 megabits. We will deliver a minimum of 25 megabits by the end of our first term. And that promise, broken in December last year, barely lasted a couple of months. And I want to draw the attention of the member for Gilmore to the success story that is Labor's NBN in her electorate. And the Illawarra Mercury recently featured a story on one of the member for Gilmore's constituents, Ms Marie Shepherd, who is enjoying the benefits of Labor's high-speed fibre broadband network, which has allowed them to work from home. And the story quotes Marie. When I studied Australian history, we studied the tyranny of distance, about the problems for Australia being so far away, Ms Shepherd said. The internet and the NBN in particular for me down here in Kiama, that tyranny of distance is gone now. The world is right here in my living room because I've got a good connection. And these are the lived experiences of people enjoying the transformational and enabling powers of ICT investments. And I believe the member for Gilmore should be there listening to their needs rather than putting through these extraordinarily ill-thought-out motions. And just to point out that while we talk about the regions and how concerned these people are about the regions, what are they doing about equivalent wholesale pricing? Gone. Selling out on equivalent wholesale pricing. We were supposed to end the disparity between metro prices and bush prices, and they have completely sold out the regions on each one of those points.
Order. The member's time has expired. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There can be few issues of more importance to the people of Hume than telecommunications. We have over 18,000 people a day travelling into Sydney and Canberra for work, and each one of those wants a connection so that they can work outside of office hours when they need to. And of course the Hume corridor between Sydney and Canberra is really the tree change capital of Australia, with huge numbers of people moving out of Sydney and Canberra for a wonderful rural lifestyle. I also have the electorate of small businesses. I have lots of edges and not many centres, and that means small business proliferates right across the electorate, and those small businesses need telecommunications for the effectiveness of their business. So I do understand rural Australia. The member for Greenway, of course, doesn't, because she doesn't come from that area, but we understand how disastrous Labor's policies were on the NBN for rural Australia. There is a long list of rivals for Labor's worst program, most disastrous program, but the rural NBN has to be at the top of the list. Let's touch on just one aspect of their failure to deliver for rural Australia, and that's the interim satellite service. Now, the NBN interim satellite service provides, or attempts to provide, temporary internet access for premises on the metropolitan fringe, but particularly in more remote areas where there is no other means of getting the internet. And in July 2013, Labor told 250,000 households and businesses, many with other broadband options, might I add, that they were eligible for the interim satellite solution. But in December 2013, less than 6 months later, the interim satellite solution reached its capacity of just 48,000 customers, having promised to 250,000, another of Labor's extravagant claims that proved to be a huge problem for the people of rural Australia. What's worse is they spent $351 million on the interim satellite solution. That's $7,300 per user, and it delivered little more than dial-up broadband speeds. $7,300 per user. What an extraordinary waste. Now, in my electorate of Hume, this was real people with real businesses. The Dysons moved into my electorate hoping to run an education business using broadband, promised that they would be able to achieve 20 megabits per second or thereabouts of download speeds to run this education business. They quickly found that that was impossible and had to move their business into town where they could get higher speeds. Now, this government moved in April 2014 to fix Labor's mistakes. $34 million was committed to improving the interim satellite service and to improve broadband quality. That's just one of the problems. If I could stand here and talk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or however long you like about the rest of them. But what's important is to talk about where we are going with all of this. And we understand that better telecommunications is the key to unlocking growth in regional Australia. In March, I announced the first towers in my electorate for fixed wireless services near Cowra and Young. 6 new towers are under construction in Cowra and Young. In fact, most of them are now up, and they'll provide fast broadband access to thousands of residents as part of our reprioritisation to rural Australia. The towers are at Kurawatha, the Olympic Highway between Cowra and Kurawatha, in Goolagong, the Lachlan Valley Way between Goolagong and Cowra, south of Canowindra, and between Darby's Falls and Wangala. All areas with huge problems with the internet. I was at the Kurawatha show recently and saw one of these sparkling new towers. They've been a long time coming. There's still a wait for these areas to be connected. That will take up to 12 months, but the residents can at last see hope. Around the town of Goulburn, we are also seeing a rapid rollout now in the coming 12 months of fixed wireless internet towers. So this government's moving on the problems in rural Australia. We understand the need for reprioritisation, but we also understand the need to allow the private sector to play a role. In the village of Harden, the community has taken this problem into its own hands and it's rolling out its own fixed wireless solution. And around Pallarang, just on the edge of Canberra, Wireless for You has been rolling out fixed wireless towers for some time. Our NBN is not seeking to push out private sector providers. In fact, we are seeking to encourage them. That is a critical part of our strategy. So I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start my contribution to today's debate with a quote from one of the co-founders of Australia's most successful software company, Atlassian. Yesterday, on Channel 9's Financial Review Sunday program, Atlassian's Mike Cannon-Brooks said, "The biggest problem the government has at the moment is it doesn't understand technology broadly." That pretty much sums it up. I was amazed that this private member's business was brought to the House, considering how viciously this government is tearing apart the national broadband network. The Abbott government is systematically destroying the world-class network that was going to be built under Labor and replacing it with a hodgepodge of different networks at a slower timetable than promised and at much slower speeds. In particular, I find it astonishing that their strategic review of the NBN is being waved round as the showcase in this debate. The Senate Select Committee on the NBN tabled its first report in March this year and was scathing of the strategic review and the processes the government is undertaking in their rollout. In essence, the interim report found that the assumptions of the strategic review are flawed and unreliable, and that the government should direct NBN Co to accelerate the fibre to the premises rollout, not stop it. Now I'd like to just concentrate on this second point made by the Senate Select Committee about accelerating the fibre to the premises rollout, not stopping it. Labor's national broadband network was to deliver superfast broadband to the front door of 93% of all Australians, about 70% more than what's going to be delivered by this government. My electorate of Newcastle was due to have 100% coverage with fibre to all premises by the end of 2016. Superfast access that would connect them to the rest of the country and the world. Every home, every school, every hospital, health clinic and every business were set to be connected. Businesses made decisions to locate themselves based on availability of the NBN and were making long-term plans to move operations into Newcastle. Construction on the network commenced in the suburb of Mayfield in Newcastle last year. Planned works and interchange upgrades were underway or completed in New Lambton and Hamilton. Some residents in Thornton, Stockton and Beresfield were to benefit from the broadband access for the first time. That's right, there are still places in Newcastle, a major regional economic hub, that have no broadband access whatsoever. Now my entire electorate sits on the scrap heap of broken promises of this government, completely removed from the rollout schedule altogether. No idea of when they'll receive NBN and no idea of what level of service they'll actually receive. Business plans are in disarray, with small and large enterprise heading back down the freeway to the Central Coast and Sydney to access the big pipe of superfast broadband. Last week, I was surprised to hear some good broadband news for the region, with rumours that the NBN was back on and that there'd be a fibre rollout announcement. I thought maybe they might restart the work at Mayfield. Maybe the people of Thornton or Stockton were going to get broadband for the very first time. I was, however, left disappointed with the detail when the announcement came out. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for the residents that are going to get NBN close to Newcastle, but I was obviously disappointed that when I read it wasn't coming to my constituents or businesses in my electorate, but to be rolled out in East Maitland, just outside of my electorate, in the Liberal-held seat of Paterson. One of the listed fundamentals of NBN Co's rollout is the prioritisation of construction of the NBN in communities in regional and rural Australia with limited or no current access to broadband. Based on this fundamental and the announcement of the construction commencing in East Maitland, I naturally assumed that they were in the same boat as Thornton, about 5 kilometres away, with no broadband access at all. Research, however, shows that was not the case. Using the Department of Communication My Broadband Checker, I got a quick insight into broadband availability and quality in East Maitland and nearby Thornton. According to the checker, Thornton, the residents of East Maitland already have high levels of access to ADSL. And unfortunately, when I checked for Thornton, it was still very much the case. The ratings, quite aptly, given the situation there, came up as DED. D, the lowest rankings possible on all measures. No more broken promises from this government, please. No more wrong priorities, no more out-of-date antiquated technologies, no more copper. We want a modern Australia and we deserve much more.
Order. The member's time has expired. The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting.